Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Hannah and today we're going to be talking about every single book that I read during the month of November. If you've been to one of these videos before, you know I usually like to kick off by talking about some of my stats for the reading month. All of these are pulled from the Storygraph, which is one of my favorite book tracking apps / sites, and I highly recommend you checking it out if you don't have it already. So first off, let's talk about numbers. I read 19 books this month, which is higher than I shoot for typically, but I have had plenty of months where I've had less than that, so I'm really still very behind on my soft goal of 200 books for the year. At this point, it's pretty much looking like I won't get there, which is fine. But anyway, so 19 books. For my moods, Storygraph actually changed their mood chart, and so now we have kind of a bar graph instead of the pie chart. But my top moods were emotional and adventurous with 9 books each. That's pretty standard for me. Tense, reflective, dark, hopeful, mysterious, inspiring, informative, funny, and sad all follow that. I read some more poetry this month, not as much as last month, and I think those are where the new moods are coming from because typically I'm not reading a lot of inspirational or informative things. Next up, we've got pace. I had 31% fast and 69% medium. I am not a slow-paced girly, never have been, never will be. My page numbers, we had 26% under 300 pages. This was a lot of the poetry books. Majority were between 300 and 499 pages at 68%, and then 5% were 500 plus. 26% nonfiction, 74% fiction. All of the nonfiction, I think all of the nonfiction is strictly poetry. And so this stat is normally much more towards fiction. Usually it's 100%. So I really have been branching out. Look at me. And next we're moving into genres. Top of the list is fantasy with 8 books read. Then we've got romance with 6, poetry with 5, dystopian science fiction and contemporary with 2, and then with 1 each, classics, LGBTQIA+, magical realism, feminism, young adult, religion, and literary. Format, we had 74% print, 28% digital. I think this is the first month in a very, very long time that I have had no audiobooks listened to. It's not that I haven't been listening to audiobooks, but I've been getting a lot of audiobooks that I'm tandem reading the physical with to kind of keep me moving along. But I'm actually very proud of this number. One of my aims for 2026 is to not listen to audiobooks when I don't feel like listening to audiobooks because I'm not an auditory learner. I don't take information in that way as well as I do when I'm visually reading the words, and I enjoy it more. So there's not a lot of point. Also, I'm a big podcast girl, and so kind of audiobooks and podcasts are always sort of competing for the same portions of my day because that's my listening availability. And so I feel like more time to listen to podcasts and not pressure myself into consuming books through audio has been a marked improvement in my reading. I feel like that shows, right? I have no audiobooks, and that's usually one of my faster ways to listen to books, but I still read 19 this month. So I think that is showing some level of improvement, like internally in my bookish psyche. Okay, back to this. Next up, we've got 1 2-star, 6 3-stars, 6 4-stars, and 6 5-stars. So pretty even ratings there. I had a lot of 5-star reads this month. I think I only had 1 reread. We'll talk about that in a little bit, which means 5 of these were just raw first time read through 5-star books, which I'm very excited about. And I think I have physical copies of every single 5-star book, which also says that the books I'm picking off my shelf are usually pretty high quality reads for me. So I'm excited about that. Okay, pages. I won't show a graph for this, but I read 6,380 pages in the month of November, which is a pretty high page count for me. I feel like I'm normally around the 4,000 to 5,000 range. So lots of reading occurred this month. And then the next graphic I'm going to throw up is one that I make myself just for my own personal tracking. My mission is to reduce my TBR. I was not successful in that this month because my TBR went up by about 4. I now have 728 books on my TBR. I didn't unhaul anything, and I read 5 ARCs this month. So that's a lot of reading that wasn't from my shelf, but I actually did get, as part of my acquisitions, 2 books that were physical copies of ARCs that I did read and love. And so I was excited to get those because I've already read them. They're not adding to my TBR. I read 14 books So a book for purposes of this graphic is anything that's not an ARC. 5 were off my shelf, 1 was a reread, and 8 were from the library. And I acquired 11 books. Like I said, only 9 of those went onto my TBR because 2 of them were ARCs I'd already read. So those are some of my stats. Let's jump into some of my reads from November. First up, we've got Shine Your Icy Crown by Amanda Lovelace. I love Amanda Lovelace. She's one of my favorite poets. I enjoyed Shine Your Icy Crown, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites from her. My all-time favorite Amanda Lovelace book is Unlock Your Storybook Heart, which is, I believe, part of the Shine Your Icy Crown series. It's so good. If you're gonna read any Amanda Lovelace, I would recommend that one or The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one. But if you already love Amanda Lovelace or are looking for more poetry by really any kind of like millennial poet, I think this would be a good one to start with. Next up, I read Pillow Thoughts 2 by Courtney Peppernell. I actually haven't read Pillow Thoughts 1 yet, but I do have it on hold of the library right now. So in December, hopefully I'll be reading it. Same thing, thought this one was good. I think Courtney Peppernell is a little bit lengthier and wordier with her poetry, which is not always my speed, but I do think she's a really great writer. So I will always read whatever Courtney Peppernell puts out. And I gave both of those 4 stars, I believe. Yes. Next up, I read The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. Originally, this was delivered at Joe Biden's inauguration by Amanda Gorman. And so I was just reading it in book form, but I really love this book. I think it's very inspirational and grounded and really just something you can hang your hat on, really. And she's got a brilliant brain and really moving words. So I gave that one 4 stars as well. Next up, we've got Son of the Morning by Akwaeke Emeze. I'm gonna be so honest with you guys, I did not love this one. The spice was kind of weird to me and it all felt very like insta-lovey, which is not normally a trope that I particularly enjoy. And I kept kind of waiting for something more to happen and it really didn't. And then at the very end, this trope that I really can like when it's done well, but like it was super out of place, just kind of got thrown in there, I feel like, for the sake of adding some like tension, and I was not a fan of it. Honestly, I don't know if this author is for me or if it was just this book, but I was not really very into this one. I think I gave it 2 stars. It was my lowest read of the year, of the month. Next up, I've got some more poetry for you. This is Winter Work by Stephen Meadows. Stephen Meadows is reasonably local to me, and so I picked this up just because I saw it at the library. I'd not heard of Stephen Meadows before. He writes poetry that is great. It's just not for me. It's very natural and grounded in earthy nature elements, which is cool. And he, like I said, is native to Northern California, which is where I'm from and have lived for most of my life. And there's a lot of imagery and places, landmarks that he discusses that I feel like you would know if you are a Northern California native, but maybe not otherwise. And so it's easy to connect with him for that reason. But I do think his poetry, at least this work, right? This is the only thing I've read by him. Kind of that emotional resonance that I look for in poetry that I really love. And so for that reason, I gave it 3 stars. But I do think that it was a good collection. And so if you're into poetry and you have a slightly different taste than I do in poetry, he might be a good one to look up. Next, we've got Live No Lies by John Mark Comer. This is a book that I was reading with my Christian book club. It's an exploration, we'll say, of biblical truth versus spiritual truth. I got a lot out of it because my faith aligns with John Mark Comer's. If yours doesn't, I don't know that you would like this book as much, but I do think it was a good look at what the Bible actually says, not what people say that it says, because Christianity definitely is full of hypocrites, just like any other religion, and I think sometimes it can be really hard to wade between what is actually of God and what is just of people using God for their own gain. This took a really good look at that. So I would recommend it if you're in the market for a book that will kind of challenge and recenter your faith. And I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, this might be, if it's not the top book of my month, it's definitely tied for the top book of my month. I read a fan favorite. This is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I have had the series on my TBR for what feels like years now, and I finally picked it up. I am buddy reading this with my husband, Michael, which has been super fun because I've had someone to talk about it with, and there is much to discuss. I almost would hesitate to call it sci-fi. I think it's primarily dystopian with a sci-fi setting, but it doesn't really center around the science at all. It's all about the dysfunctional society. I think Pierce Brown does some of the best character work. I love his plots. It sounds really cliche, but everything about this book. Don't know what I expected it to be, but it is incredibly different than what I had in my head as what this series would be. If you're even a little bit curious about it, it is worth checking out. There's a lot of books that I love that I can understand why other people wouldn't, especially if they don't have similar tastes to me. I genuinely can't think of a person who wouldn't be able to find something in here that they could take away from it and absolutely love. I think Darrow as a character is so interesting and complex, and he's not perfect, but you relate to him on a really raw human level. And I think the scope of his journey is so large that you can kind of see him struggling with the individual challenges he's facing within this broader context of what his like overall mission is. And it's, your heart aches for him. He's been through so much, and he's only 16 when this book starts. And so he's a little baby, and he's experienced so much grief and loss at such a young age that, anyway, I could wax poetic on this for a long time, but I highly recommend Red Rising. You should read it if you haven't. And the other thing I wanted to say about this is I love romance. I love romance, probably one of my favorite genres. Even if I'm reading like a high fantasy or a sci-fi or contemporary fiction, I want some level of romance in it to keep me intrigued. And that's honestly, I think, what put me off this book and this whole series for a long time, is because people would say that there's not a lot of romance in it, so don't read it if you're reading for romance. And I always kind of had this internal belief about myself that I needed romance in order to enjoy something. But I got so intrigued by just the political machinations and everything else that's in this book that I was like, I'm just gonna read it. And if I hate it because there's no romance, then that'll kind of do it for me. Like, I have to have romance, right? And so I read it. I can see why people say that. Romance is not at the forefront of this series at all, but Darrow, the main character, is so driven and motivated by love for his family, for his friends, for his cause, that there's romance in here. There is like actual basic, what you would expect romance later on in it as well. So if you are reading for that, you will be, I think, rewarded at some point, just maybe not as much if you're reading a boy meets girl, enemies to lovers, whatever kind of tropey based romance. So I could say a lot more about this series, but I do think you should read it. That's Red Rising by Pierce Brown. 5 stars. Okay, I didn't come prepared because I actually did just get a copy of this one. This is one of the arcs that I got a copy of after I'd finished reading it. But this is Fallen City by Adrienne Young. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was a very well-crafted story. It's a little bit complicated. It's set in this like Roman Greco inspired setting. There's a city and it's being besieged, so it may become a fallen city, hence the title. And the story centers around these 2 main characters who, you know, they're in love from the first opener of the book, but you're jumping back and forth between point of views between them and timelines, so past and present. And I think while I was still getting to know the characters, it was a little bit hard to keep track of where we were at and how these things piece together. But I do think Adrienne Young has such a talent for crafting intricate romances and just stories generally. There's honestly not a lot of plot in here. It's more political maneuvering and character development within the broader context of this setting that I think the world will expand in book 2. And I did really enjoy this one. I think Adrienne Young has excellent writing, and I think these characters grew on me. I don't think I fell in love with them the way that I do with some fictional characters, but they were still very good characters, and you understood their motivations, I think, better than a lot of authors can make you understand characters. So I would recommend picking this one up if you like serious, grounded romantasy, because it really is about the romance. There's a lot to get there, and I think for me, the plane didn't quite land by the end of this. I would have been happy if it had wrapped up as a single book, because I feel like the cliffhanger was kind of added on just to have like a book 2, which I'm sure is not the case, right? I'm sure the author planned that out. It's just how it read to me. However, I do think you should go look it up. The Fairy Loot edition of this book is literally one of the most gorgeous books that exists. That's Fallen City. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I have possibly my favorite romance of the year. Maybe. This is Ready or Not by Cara Stone. This is my first Cara Stone book. I, again, don't know what I was expecting, but it was not this. And this was such a pleasant surprise. I absolutely loved it. A lot of people, I think, kind of stray away from this book because it does have an accidental pregnancy trope, but it's not in the same way that so many other books do, where that's like thrown in at the end to kind of contrive some sort of conflict. The book opens that way with her getting pregnant, and she's got a lot of conflict with the father because she doesn't know him super well, and so they're trying to kind of navigate what bringing a human into the world together looks like. And she's getting a lot of support from her best friend and her best friend's brother, Shep. And I loved Shep as a character. This is kind of an atypical romance. I think I'm kind of reaching a point in my reading journey where I'm having a hard time with just basic romances where guy falls for a girl happily ever after. And so I like romance with stuff in it. Abby Jimenez does this really well. Emily Henry does this really well. Cara Bastone does this really well. So I would recommend reading this book for sure if you like romance, but you're looking for something with a little bit more depth than just a typical basic romance. That is Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This is also at the top of my list for favorite books that I read in the month of November. Next up, I read Four Ruined Realms by Mai Corland. I'm actually going to talk about this in tandem with Three Shattered Souls. These are the sequels to Five Broken Blades. For Four Ruined Realms, I enjoyed this book. It was fun in the sense that Mai Corland's books are always fun. This whole trilogy is fun, but this book for me felt like a lot of us just running around doing various tasks for various people and not a whole lot of through line. The character that I hate the most ended up dying at the end of this book, and so I considered that one of the biggest victories that this book has. I won't tell you who it is, that way you can still read it. And then the second sequel, the third book in the trilogy and final book in the trilogy, I thought was better. It held my attention more, and I feel like we got more character development, particularly from my two favorite characters, which are Sora and Mikhail. And yeah, now that I've completed it, I think it's a fine series, and I would recommend it for someone looking for something entertaining that maybe doesn't need to be the most finely crafted or, complex book, right? It is pretty much exactly as advertised. I gave Four Ruined Realms 3 stars and Three Shattered Souls 4 stars. Next up, I've got another arc for you. This is Something Wicked by Fallon Ballard. This is the first Fallon Ballard book that I've read, and to be honest, I am not motivated to read more. This was supposed to be vaguely Moulin Rouge inspired, and I didn't really get that. I love Moulin Rouge, and I did not love this. Kind of the whole premise, which you'll understand it when you read it, is centered around magical orgasms, which is not normally my trope of choice. I just felt like the plot was kind of thin, the characters were pretty thin. I just wasn't very invested in it, but it was a fine book. Like, it didn't have bad writing. It wasn't atrocious. I think it just wasn't for me. So I gave this one 3 stars, and I know it was Fallon Ballard's first stab at romantasy, so maybe her romances are different, and I hope that that's true because I have another arc for her for Toe to Toe that's coming out in a couple of months. So we will see how that goes, but that's Something Wicked by Fallon Ballard. I gave it 3 stars. Next up, this one was a surprise for me. This is another book that has been on my shelf for what feels like ages, and I'm just going to tell you what it is so I can talk about it. This is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. I first read Maggie Stiefvater when I was probably 13 or 14 years old with her Shiver series, which is a kind of werewolf romance that now I want to read again because of how good this was. This was atmospheric. It's set on a small, misty local island off of the shores of Ireland. There are these races that happen every November called the Scorpio Races, in which the Kapelushka, which is the water horses, they're an ancient Irish cryptid figure, come out of the ocean to come onto the island, and they can be caught. They can't be tamed, but they can be ridden and raced in this traditional island race. And our main character, Puck, needs some money to basically save her and her brothers from losing their family house. And so she enters this race with her regular horse and the story kind of unfolds from there. It is a romance, but I would say romance is a portion of the story. It's not the entire story. And it really is, I think, a love story, but the love story is less between the two main characters and it's more between the main character and the love that she has for her island, as well as the male main character and his love for his horse. I was just swept away by this, truly. I honestly thought it would be 4 stars until the ending, and then the ending hit and I just felt the waterworks, and I was like, wow, it turns out I care about these characters so much more than I thought I did. I'm starting to tear up just thinking about it. This book came out, it actually looks like it won some kind of award. It's an award for young adult literature. This came out in, I want to say 2012 or 2011. So it's been around for a while, but I highly recommend reading it. I do think if you read it in November, you will get that extra hit of there-ness that you sometimes get when you read something really just at the right time. So that's The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. I highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. Next up, I'm not going to spend forever on this book because it's a reread and so many people have read this already that you don't need me telling you more about it. But this was the month for A Court of Wings and Ruin in my Sarah J. Maas reread. This is the second to last book I'll be rereading. I'm just doing Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. I finished Throne of Glass. November was ACOWAR, and then I'm reading ACO Fast in December. And I won't be rereading A Court of Silver Flames or the Crescent City books. So this is my penultimate reread, and I just love this book so much. It's always going to be a 5-star for me. I love these characters. I love this world. I love this story, and I love Sarah J. Maas's writing. So really, it's just the whole package. If you haven't read ACOTAR, I highly recommend it. But if you haven't read it by now, maybe it's not your cup of tea, and that's okay too. Next up, we've got Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. I gave this one 5 stars. Similar to the Scorpio Races, I actually thought this one would be a 4-star until the end, where it was just blow after blow after blow of really jaw-dropping plot twists. And I love this one so much. And I think seeing Darrow in a setting that's not the Institute was very interesting, and he goes through a lot of growth in this book, and I'm obsessed with Mustang. I will forever be obsessed with Mustang. I'm just looking forward to the rest of his journey. I'm about 25% into Morningstar as I record this, so I've gotten some resolution on the crazy cliffhanger end of this book, but not a lot of resolution. So I am looking forward to wrapping that up, and I highly recommend this series. This was 5 stars for me as well. Next up, I read an arc. This is The Charmed Library by Jennifer Moorman. This was, to be honest with you, not my favorite. This felt like Walmart Once Upon a Time in the sense that there's a magical library, and in it, the fictional characters in the books can come to life, but only for 2 weeks out of the year. And so our main character has kind of a romance with a fictional character crush, which is kind of every girl's dream. So I thought the premise was really cute, but I don't know that I loved the execution. And for being kind of a really interesting concept, I feel like the plot was very low stakes and meandery, and I don't think there was a lot of character development or growth. So it wasn't one of my favorites, but I did give it 3 stars. I think it's cute. I think it's fun. If you're needing something a little bit lighter, then this might be a good book for you. Next up, I got another arc. This is Silver and Blood by Jessie Mihalik. This publishes on January 27th, and it is a romantasy. It's about a witch who lives in this village, and this village kind of hates her and sends her into the woods to kill a monster that hurt one of the other villagers. They really don't like her magic. She goes into the forest, finds the monster, almost gets killed by the monster, and then this handsome hunky man saves her, and the book is told in dual POV, and it's kind of just them figuring out what the heck is going on with her magic. And all of that I just told you happens in the first chapter. So you were not spoiled just now. I did like this one. I kept waiting for something to happen. I felt like we had a really long story to not learn a lot. I think the characters' love was a little bit lackluster for me. The spice scenes were kind of out of nowhere, and I don't feel like they furthered any kind of romance plot, anything. There is a magical castle in this one. I loved that aspect of things. And there is a kind of companion wolf named Grim to the male main character, and I loved Grim. And I think I would read this next book in the series since this is set up for a sequel, but it wasn't one of my all-time favorites. I gave this one 3 stars. Next up, I've got this collection of Robert Frost poems. This is The Road Not Taken and Other Poems by Robert Frost. One of my favorite poems is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, and that's one of his later works. A lot of the works that were in here were his earlier works, and I'm not as much a fan of those because they feel less poetic and more prosaic, and the writing feels just kind of long and meandery, and he said this, she said this, they went here, I went there. It wasn't my favorite. I think Robert Frost will kind of live on in my brain, his later works, as being what I like from him. His early stuff, I could take it or leave it, but most of these were written in the early 1800s, so I feel like I can't judge him too much. I totally lied to you, sorry. Most of these were written in the late 1800s. Yeah. I think if you're into poetry, it's always worth checking this one out because Robert Frost is pretty pervasive across poetry as a whole. I gave this one 3 stars. This is The Wedding People by Alison Espach. I don't know how to say her name. I loved this one. I think that there's a very specific type of contemporary / literary fiction that I like, and this perfectly slots in there. Another book that I can think of that is perfectly slotted in there is Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson. I think The Favorites by Lane Fargo will slot in there as well. This is kind of a mix, I think, of rich people behaving badly a la Taylor Reid with a little bit bit of Ellen Hildebrand's kind of flair to it, where there is a great setting here. They're in Newport, Rhode Island. She's staying at a hotel with the intention of killing herself, and all of the other guests there are there as wedding guests of this wedding. She runs into the bride and her have a conversation, and she sort of decides to delay killing herself until she kind of figures out what's going on with this wedding. Thought this was written excellently. The author certainly knows how to put a story together. I really came to care about the characters. I thought there was really good character development, really interesting plot, a fair amount of like flashbacks, but they didn't read like your classic flashback, which sometimes flashbacks annoy me. So I'm glad that we were more kind of learning about the characters through her inner dialogue, as opposed to being like, and now back 2 years ago, or however some people set it up. And we didn't really switch POVs necessarily. Phoebe is very much the main character, but we do get a little bit of internal dialogue from other characters throughout because it is an omniscient narrator. I just loved this one so much. I thought it started really dark, so I would be careful with this one if you have any trigger warnings that apply to you related to suicide. But if you don't, or you can get through it, I think this has a message less so about suicide and more so about hope and the value that building connections with other people has in our lives. So that is The Wedding People by Alison Esbach. And that is everything that I read in the month of November 2025. Thanks so much for coming on this journey with me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.